Signature Tribute Event Center, here for Grieving Hearts, hosted by Christine McMillan. Christine does not work for Families First, I would like to clarify that, but she is wonderful in working with us. So we're very lucky to have her, both as access for our families, but also for evenings like this. I'm not going to take up too much of your time. Christine has a lot of great information, so thank you all for coming. As some of you had asked, masks are optional, so however you're comfortable at your tables, feel free to do whatever makes you comfortable. And without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Christine.
Thank you, John.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you to all of you for coming. However, I am very sorry for the reason that you're here. Thank you to all of you that are joining us from wherever you are, remotely as well. Nothing short of having your beloved child back will make any of this okay. I know that. The death of your child, regardless of age or circumstance, defies the logic and the story that we tell ourselves that parents die before children. It's overwhelming. You are living the experience that every parent dreads and fears. The death of a child is so profoundly overwhelming and empowering that I'm sure if you are certainly new to the grieving process, you're wondering, can I ever get through it? Do I want to even get through it? I have had the privilege of walking with many parents who have sustained that storm of grief. They've walked through the fire and they've come out the other side. They're different, they're changed forever, but they're not broken. You may feel broken now, but I ask you, at least after tonight, to maybe hold a little hope that there might be a better yet to come. I don't expect you to believe it 100%. I don't expect you to know what that looks like, but just keep that in the back of your mind, please. So tonight I need you to do whatever you need to take care of yourself. So we're going to start with maybe just reflecting on why we're here. Maybe kind of take your internal temperature, okay? Kind of go inside and think, feel what you're feeling. Whatever it is. Yes?
There's something I object to up here on your...
Sure, what's that?
Where it says living with the death of your child. No, it's existing with the death of your child. And if you think you're living with the death of your child, something will come up and kick you in the ass real fast. Whether it's a memory or something else.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I just don't think that word should be there. That's
Okay.
just my opinion.
And I appreciate, what's your name?
Frank.
Frank, okay. And who died? What was his name?
Mark.
Okay. When did Mark die?
In October.
In October. Okay.
He got up, he made dinner for his daughter, and he got up and he dropped dead on the floor at 43.
And I understand why that you object to that. But I want to also say that these seminars are about hope. Okay? So I hope that one day you can understand, okay, why we've chosen living with the death of your child.
Oh, it's not here yet.
Okay. And if you're there, then I'd like you to say, I'm not there, I'm not ready, not yet. I want you to hold on to a possibility. And everybody's different, but just hold on to that possibility, okay? So what I was about to say actually was that you're not here because of your children, you're here for your children. Okay? Okay, think about that as we go through the evening. The restrooms are out the second door. Okay, both men and women, please do whatever you need to do. If you need to get up, get a breath of fresh air. I will ask halfway through the session if you want a stretch break, and you can say yay or nay, whatever you'd like. We've got a fairly small group tonight, so if you want it to be interactive, a little bit more than when we have the larger groups, that's fine. It is, however, not a support group. Otherwise, I wouldn't be standing up here. We'd all be sitting at a table. So I can't speak always specifically to your losses, but certainly if you have a question about what's up there, you want me to explain anything more, you want me to review it, I'm more than happy to do that. Okay? So what we're going to go through tonight are these things. What is this thing that you're going through? What is grief? And why is your type of grief unique and different? Because every grief is different. And we tend to put them on a hierarchy, but unless we've experienced all the deaths, it's really not fair. So we're just going to talk about uniqueness of a parental death. I'm also going to mention what we call danger signs, that if you don't do your grief work, you might find yourself experiencing some of these danger signs. And lastly, I want you to get to the point where you can transform your pain and maybe see a little hope. And I know that also may sound strange. It may sound that you're being disloyal to your child. But just bear with me, okay? So when we talk about the death, this gentleman right here talked about his son and how he died, or what they know. But when we're talking about a death, it could be from any number of these occurrences. From perinatal death to an adult child. So obviously I don't know who's in the audience. I don't know specifics of your case. So this is going to be a very general presentation, understand that. If you have something specific that doesn't meet your needs after tonight, call me, come up and chat with me. Because I can almost guarantee that although you're here because you've lost your beloved child, each of your stories at the table is unique and different. So you're here because of this very simple biological phenomena, and that's called attachment. If we have the capacity to attach, we will grieve. So what is this thing we call grief that you're going through? You may know what you're experiencing. Well, it's here because of attachment. It's actually separation anxiety. Really, when you think about it, it's a form of separation anxiety. You are separated from your beloved child. When your children were young and you left them for the first time, they protested. They protested when you handed them over to a stranger. And we call that separation anxiety. Well, it's normal, it's biological, it's natural. And this is what you're going through now, except now we call it grief. It affects our emotions, our minds, our body, and our spirit. And here's the interesting thing. If we have the capacity to attach, we will grieve when we no longer have access to our loved ones. So it's universal, but it's also unique. So when I ran support groups, I knew that I would never hear two stories that were alike. There were similarities, perhaps the cause of death, perhaps the age of the child. So it's both universal and it's unique to you. And it is a response to all kinds of losses, but tonight, obviously, we're gonna talk about separation anxiety due to death. So, the next slide will be a series of signs, symptoms, responses. And if you see anything up there that looks familiar, let me know. I think I pressed this and it came up too fast. So, anybody see themselves up there? All of them. Pretty well, eh? To some degree. I bet you never knew that's what it would be like. No. Because we don't talk about this, right? We celebrate our successes, our joys. And it's not a morbid thing to talk about grief, but we really are a death-denying culture. But this is called good grief because this is normal. When you are acutely grieving, so what I mean by acutely, the death has happened recently. And depending on the type of death, recent could also mean a year and a half, depending on the type of death. If you're experiencing to some degree any or all of these, you're normal. And you know what? You don't always have to feel this way. This is not your forever. But this is your normal right now. And if I didn't see some of this, then what you're going to have is delayed grief, complex grief. Because you're not feeling any of this right now. So if we were to take these bullet points and categorize them, okay? This is how grief disrupts our life. And we usually think of just emotional, crying, profound sadness, yearning, longing, anger, regret, relief, maybe in some cases, guilt about feeling relieved. But it doesn't only affect us emotionally. Grief is stress, so it affects us physically. Our heads are connected to our bodies. Our hearts are part of our body. So it affects us physically. You may have found that your eating is disrupted. Digestion, you may have found that your sleep is disrupted. Backaches, stomach aches, tension, headaches. If you are managing any kind of chronic condition, stress is going to increase those symptoms. Anybody experience that? Okay. So I always tell my clients to get a full physical. I know that's been difficult in these last 2 years, but certainly get a hold of your doctor. Let them know that you're experiencing this. And if any of the physical symptoms don't subside with time, then we really need to be looking at any kind of organic or underlying issue. But we also know that stress in and of itself can bring on medical issues. Well, guess what? It also affects our minds. Who has difficulty concentrating, focusing, reading a newspaper, has motivation to do anything, is forgetful? Well, you know what? When our emotions take over, it takes our minds offline. We're so preoccupied with trying to come to grips with the reality that we have no time and space to think about anything. Bills go unpaid. Telephone calls don't get returned. Appointments are forgotten. You're not going crazy. You're grieving. Socially it affects us as well, especially as parents. How do you feel about still socializing with other parents who haven't lost a child? When they talk about their children. And if you are a parent of an only child that died, that is also unique in and of itself. Do you fit in? Are you still a parent? You feel you can't connect with people. Sometimes people who you think know you very well and you know them. Are they really going to be able to get it? They might say certain things. So be prepared for that. Or on the other hand, you might find that you're drawn to people. You want to be around people all the time. So again, it can vary. And lastly, this thing we call grief affects us on what we call a spiritual level, not religion, but spiritual in terms of meaning and purpose in life. What do I do now? How do I go on? It affects our identities. It affects our worldviews. If your core belief was that the world was a loving, kind place, it's going to be challenged, isn't it? With the unfairness of your child's death. There is a sacredness in tears. They are not the mark of weakness, but of power. They speak more eloquently than 10,000 tongues. They are messengers of overwhelming grief and unspeakable love. So if your body naturally needs to heal by crying, please don't deny yourself that. So here are some things I want you to have etched in your mind by the time you leave tonight. It's a normal, natural outcome after any death. It is not stage-like. So disregard the stages. It's very tempting to think of it as stage-like, right? Because how many stages we got? 5. We've been taught there's 5 stages. And if I'm on stage 3, then I'm closer to the end. And it gives us a sense of control. But you may have found that grief is more wave-like, circular, spiral, and it's very dynamic. It's a dynamic process. One moment you think you've got it, and the next moment you're down on your knees. Normal. It's not you. It can be unpredictable and overwhelming. And I would think that we all consider ourselves fairly in-control people, you know. We pay our bills on time, we go to work, we go grocery shopping, we got things in control. This pulls the rug out from under us. No end point. I don't want to scare anybody here. But if you're grieving because you were attached to your child because of love, then grief really doesn't end because love doesn't end, but it changes. You are not always going to feel, or potentially, you are not always going to feel this way, but you will always dance with your grief to some extent. It's not a sprint. It's a marathon. So you have to pace yourself. Slower is better. You can't press the fast forward button of grief. You can't do this alone either. A lot of the work is reflective, it's inward work, because it's your relationship with your beloved child. Even your partner isn't going to grieve the same way. Because as parents, you parented differently. And so you're going to grieve differently. You're going to grieve that specific, unique relationship. So you do the heavy lifting on your own. You feel the pain on your own, but you need people to hold you up. And whether that be a professional person, a spiritual person, self-help group, whatever you need, please don't be afraid of asking for help. However, no one will respond perfectly to your grief either. And this speaks to the social aspect of grief, because we somehow have this expectation that our family's going to be there for us, or our friends are going to be there for us. And we learn that maybe it's not possible. Maybe the one friend you thought would hold your hand through this is the friend that maybe can only run errands for you. Maybe they can't sit and hold your pain. And I know it's a burden when you're going through this to have to figure that out. But it would be best if you try to determine what the people in your life can offer you. Some people can't handle emotions. Some people are better at cooking you a meal or picking up your dry cleaning or cutting your grass. That's also support. Don't fight the sorrow. You have to surrender to this process, and that means you have to give up some control. For now. And you have to ask why before you start asking, how do I get through this? Why did this happen? That's the protest. How can this happen? How did this happen? And then how can I get through this? What do I need to get through this? Any questions so far? Comments? No? So, how do you get through this? Understand that I'm going to be talking about the trajectory of the grief process. You may be at the very beginning, and some of the things towards the end of my presentation may seem like it's not possible. I just want you to keep it in mind, okay? It's not specific to where you are right now. So, how do I get through this? Well, just as grief is normal, natural, nature has given us this wonderful thing called mourning to get us through this. So what does mourning mean? Did you know that there's a difference between grief and mourning? Well, I just told you, didn't I? What do you think mourning is? So grief is how I feel, how it affects my mind, my body, my spirit, my relationships. What do you think mourning is? Yes?
How you act.
Yeah. It's how I release my grief feelings. Exactly. It's an action. You're absolutely right. It's the outward expression of what I'm feeling inside. That gentleman, actually, he was mourning in a way. He objected. He said it out loud. He put it out there. It's really grief gone public. If I walked in here, I wouldn't know that you were all grieving. Right? I wouldn't know that. But if I saw tears, if I heard stories about your beloved child, I think, oh, this might be a grief group. It's absolutely needed. This action, as that gentleman said, is needed to get through the process. This is the storm I was talking to you about that the parents that I've supported go through. Because this requires you to feel the pain, the unimaginable pain, and find a way to release it. So you're not carrying it around inside of you. Because when you carry it inside you, all that passes is time. Nothing changes. And then those feelings become part of who you are. They freeze inside of you. However, it's very difficult to mourn in this society. What do we do when you start crying? We shove a Kleenex, right? And what's that? That's a sign, stop crying. You're making me uncomfortable. Or you don't want to make anyone else uncomfortable around you when they ask you how you're doing. All caring about everybody else except ourselves. So these are some mourning avoiding behaviors. Usually when I ask, has anyone done any of these? No one puts up their hand. But come on. We do need distractions, okay? We do need distractions. But when we engage in any behavior excessively to any extent and we don't make room for our grief, then we're avoiding mourning. So if I came up and asked you how you're doing, you're most likely to say, fine, I'm keeping busy, right? Routine is good. Busy, so that you don't stop and feel, is not good. Because I'll guarantee you're going to take it to bed with you, you're not going to be able to sleep. So, because grief is very wave-like, it's going to come up during the day to get your attention. And there are times during the day that you can't stop and meet its needs. But if you can, if there are no other demands on you, then please find a way to release it during the day. I'm a bereaved mom. The reason I'm doing this work is because I'm a bereaved mom. And I remember thinking I wanted to press the fast forward button of what I was going through. I didn't like it. I wanted to be better sooner. And of course, my experience was that it was a perinatal loss. I lost my firstborn at 8 months in pregnancy. And of course, one of the things that I heard a lot was, right, you're young, you can get pregnant again. Well, first of all, they didn't know how old I was. Second of all, they didn't know if I could get pregnant again. But again, we want you not to feel the pain. So hurry up and have another child. That'll make it all better. But you know what? I wanted that child. I wanted that child that I held, that I took pictures of, that I took hand and footprints, and I've got a little bit of her hair, a lock of her hair. Because that's all I'm gonna get. So I had to really work my way through the urgency to want to hurry up and get pregnant again. So anytime you find you're doing anything with a sense of urgency, it's a mourning avoiding behavior. Okay? Because many times I'm asked that. How do I know if I'm moving towards something healthy or I'm running away? If you feel some anxiety to do it, if you feel like you're in a rush, you've got to get it done, then you have to stop and take a breath. And what we know is that when we engage in these mourning avoiding behaviors, you might experience some of these outcomes. So just as a physical pain gets our attention to take action, emotional pain is getting our attention, trying to get our attention. But we're so good at avoiding it, aren't we? We're so good. No, I can't do it. It's hurt too much. It's too painful. That's the pain you have to slowly dose yourself with. So just as if you shouldn't run away from it, you can't always fast forward it. You have to go according to grief's pace. Any questions about that? So, what then is mourning? As the gentleman said, it's action. It's doing. Grief is feeling, experiencing. Mourning is what do I do in order to get through this? So you don't wait for time to pass. You use the time by mourning. So time does not heal in and of itself. It's how you use the time. When I get clients that come to me relatively soon after the death, I'm not doing grief therapy. I'm basically recognizing, I assess obviously for any risk factors, unhealthy behaviors, but mostly I'm reinforcing that what they're going through is normal and that it doesn't have to be permanent. And I help them with healthy coping strategies. And I let them tell their story over and over again for as long as they need to. But if you don't do your mourning, then what you've got is grief unresolved, plus anything else that you've undertaken to avoid it. So then I'm doing grief therapy with you. We've got to get rid of all this other stuff before we get to the grief. I'm going to read you something. This book is by Tom Zuba, Permission to Mourn, A New Way to Do Grief. His 18-month-old daughter died. 9 years later, his 43-year-old wife died. 6 years later, his 13-year-old son died. So he says, I've learned a thing or two about life and death and grief and healing over the past 20 plus years. I have learned that the death of someone we love dearly cracks us open. It is supposed to. It is essential that you understand that. You will never, ever be the person you were before. The person you love who died. Never, ever. Until you surrender to that truth, you will not heal. Until you release the energy you focus on trying to, yearning to, longing to go back to the life you had, you will not have the energy you need to create your new life. You will remain stuck in limbo, stuck between lives. Some people stay there forever, in that in-between stuck place. The death of someone you love dearly gives you the opportunity to question everything. Everything. It's supposed to. So it cracks us open. And this journey isn't quick, so we don't put ourselves together quickly. So, what mourning does is it transforms acute grief early in the process when it's stinging and it's burning. It transforms it into what we call integrated grief. That's the grief that we can live with. Okay? I don't know what that's going to look like for you. This is what it looks like for me. I would have never have thought I'd be doing this work before we lost our daughter. But this is how I live with my grief. I'm going to read one more thing from Tom Zuba. In order to heal, you must mourn. You must push grief up and out. Contrary to the old way of doing grief, denying, suppressing, pretending, and stuffing your feelings and emotions down, you must find ways to feel, express, honor, and release all of the feelings and emotions that are bubbling up inside you. You must actively pursue your own healing. Time alone will not and does not heal. You've been lied to. It's what you consciously decide to do with your time that matters. That determines whether or not you will heal. So, I can't tell you that you've got to write letters or journal or cry or go to a support group. You have to figure that out for yourself. Whether it be doing something with your hands, building something in honor, whether it be going to a therapist or a grief group. Whatever suits your personality and your needs, write your own self-care plan. Any questions about that? So grief is what happens to you. Mourning is how I get through it. When a child dies, it is always out of season. When a child dies, dreams die, and we are all diminished by the loss of human potential. Although dying is a part of life, a child's death, in a very real sense, is unnatural and has a devastating and enduring impact. A child's death is experienced as the death of future dreams. I know I can speak to that because I had lots of plans for my daughter, just as you did. And it creates a profound change in a parent's current role and functioning. Because what's a child? A child is many things. A child is part of you. A child is part of your partner. It's a link. They're a link to the past and the future. And in a way, even a bit narcissism, right? Little, he or she looked like me, or my grandmother, or my father. We take delight in that. And so what are our responsibilities as parents? Well, we're supposed to be a role model, a nurturer, teacher, and ideally protect them emotionally, psychologically, and physically until we bring them to adulthood. But even then, we're still a parent. We still feel a sense of responsibility, even if it's not logical, because grief isn't logical, okay? Grief isn't logical at all. It's all coming from the heart. And so after a death of a child, parents feel a sense of loss of control and competence, even if we had nothing, there was no connection to their death. Of Of course, we feel a loss of self also, a loss of somebody that was valued in the family system. What we also know is after death of a child, the responses. Do you remember that one of the first slides with good grief, all of those responses? What we know is that the reactions are more intense with parents who have lost a child. They feel it more deeply. It can also be a longer journey. And of course, it can affect our meaning and our identity. Am I still a parent of 3, 4, 2? Am I still a parent if I've lost my only child? Who am I now? How do you answer the question, how many children do you have? What are you comfortable saying? Speak your truth. There is also a sense of isolation and loss of support, because if your social circle obviously included other parents, they're not going to know what to say. And if you've got parents who are still part of your social circle and they're good supports, consider yourself very, very fortunate, because even though they may not have experienced the death, they're showing you they're willing to enter into your world. And they'll ask you questions like, tell me what you need. What does it feel like? They're not presuming anything. They're not assuming things that you need, because you may not know what you need, but they're there for you. And remember, quality of the support far outweighs quantity. So if you have 1 or 2 good people in your life, treasure them. Do you want to take a quick stretch break? What would you like to do? Yes? No? Don't be shy. No? I see a no. No? Ready to go? Okay, all right, we'll keep going. So, after the death of your child, what parents have to do is redefine their version of parenthood. Because at some level, if our role was to protect the child, even an adult child, there's a sense of vulnerability, of failure. It may not be your experience. This is generally speaking. There's a sense of helplessness. And parents have to find ways to figure out, who am I now? How do I remember my child while I continue living? So how other parents have coped is by doing these things. Now remember, if you're acutely grieving, you may not be here right now. And I wouldn't expect you to be. But if you do remember this part as you journey on and you start to experience it, know that it's normal and it's good and it's healthy. So they do it by protecting the child's memory, learning to live with regret, find a way to find some meaning, and then they have to define a new normal. Michael said he wasn't afraid of dying. He was afraid of being forgotten. I can see that as part of my mission to continue to allow him to live, to share his story and carry it on. This is a significant part in redefining parenthood. Parents know that they're not going to forget their child, but you know what? They don't want anybody else to. because they lived, they breathed, they made a mark here. And so what we find is, it's not uncommon that parents need to talk about their children, tell the story, remember. A mom tonight came and brought me her child's university transcripts. This is someone that I'm working with, and she mentioned that she received the transcripts in the mail after her child's death. Can you imagine what a trigger that would have been? But we talked about it. And she said she would come tonight, and she's here tonight, and she showed me the transcripts. That's her way of telling me about him, more about him, because I never got to meet your children. So I learn about them through you. And by the same token, you're getting to share your child with me. They're valuable, they existed. As painful as that is, you get to tell me about them. And I hold them close in my heart. This is very, very difficult. I think generally speaking, as human beings, we have a difficult time living with regret. But when it comes to our children, after their deaths, it's very profound experience. At some point, parents will eventually need to come to terms with things the way they are. That nothing can be changed. But before you get to that, you've got to do the questioning, you've got to do the asking, you've got to do the what ifs. And has anyone had this experience? If you're verbalizing or sharing this with a family member or a friend, well, what if I did this? What if he didn't do this? Has anyone kind of shut you down and said, well, that's not going to change things? Have you had that experience where they've tried to divert you, right? It's not going to make you feel any better. As Alan Wolfelt says, you say true, but not helpful right now. Because you need to do that in order to get to this. You need to ask the what ifs. You need to play it out in your head until you come to a place that you can live with. What if I didn't give him the car keys? What if I drove them instead of letting them drive? What if I'd taken them to the hospital earlier? What if I'd asked more probing questions about how they were feeling? So you do that. That's part of your mourning, but I want you to balance it with the things you did do. Because what we tend to do in our sadness and in our grief and our pain is our brains will get drawn to the negative. Our brains are kind of hardwired. It's called negativity bias. So if one negative thing has happened and we get absorbed in it, we tend to stay there. Because then we can think of everything else that's, including the weather outside, that has nothing to do with us. So I want you to do the questioning. I want you to feel whatever you're feeling, and then I want you to balance that out. Those parents that cannot come to live with regret have a really difficult time to get on with the job of living. So you've got to, this is the pain that you have to go through. This is the fire that you have to go through. And then there's meaning making. So personally, I found meaning in this work. I started off doing volunteer work, which led to a career in bereavement at Canadian Mental Health for over 14 years. I didn't wake up one day and say I wanted to do this for a living. But I can't imagine doing anything else right now. So when we come to terms with the fact that nothing we could have done would have changed the trajectory of the outcome of our child's life, parents have found a way to make some meaning out of it. Finding blessings and silver linings, again, that might be very distasteful for anybody who's new in the process. It's extremely individual. Do not allow anybody to write that script for you when you get here. You decide what meaning there is in this. And it depends on a lot of things. It depends on who you are, who your support system is, your outlook on life, your belief system, your cultural impacts. I'm going to read you something else about meaning making. As a pediatrician, married mom of 3 biological children and 1 foster son, my life was busy, rushing off to the office 4 days a week, seeing patients for 3, and working as a medical director. I balanced this with rushing off to shuttle my kids to sports and other after-school activities. All of this changed one day in August 2018 when my 14-year-old son Andy was killed in a car accident. I felt like my life was over, and in some ways it was over, and a new life was forced to begin in its place. Grief is seldom discussed openly in our culture, and the death of a child makes people feel even more uncomfortable. When Andy first died, I didn't want anything good to come from his death. I selfishly wanted everything about it to be 100% horrible. I didn't want there to be a silver lining. Perhaps that is why it annoyed me so much when people tried to cheer me up in some way, telling me that he was in a better place or that it was all part of God's plan. Well, God's plan stinks. I would reply either in my head or even out loud if the person was a close enough friend. After time, though, I began to realize that I did want something good to come from this whole experience. Andy deserves that. He deserves to have something amazing and beautiful come from the ugliness. For me, the desire to make something beautiful with Andy became the Always Andy's Mom podcast. For others, it may be founding an organization like Mothers Against Drunk Driving. For the majority of people, however, it is doing something much smaller, perhaps something just for you, your family, or even something that helps just one other person in pain. We are certainly not the same people that we were before the death loss occurred. I know it felt to me like I did not just lose Andy, I lost a huge part of myself as well. I had to take a long, hard look at myself and ask this question: what do I do with what's left? I'm not the same person, but what can I do moving forward? What are my strengths and how can I use them in a positive way? The answers to these questions are different for every person, but know that as broken as we feel, we all do have strengths, and turning to them is what will lead to healing. We cannot put the cart before the horse. She went through mourning. She went through it. I know personally, I decided one day I didn't want my daughter's memory to be one of pain for the rest of my life. I didn't think that was a good legacy for her. But that was after I went through the storm. So downward comparisons. So this is interesting. This is when parents come to realize that there are other parents who have experienced loss. And they realize that maybe the other parent is worse off. So even though a parent has lost a child, they will perceive somehow that they benefited somehow, that their pain isn't as great as the next. So sometimes a parent will say, well, at least I got a chance to say goodbye. But that's not somebody telling you that's what you should feel. That's you feeling it. Or at least my child didn't suffer. So again, that's what you do when you go through this process. You come to terms with it. You tell yourself what you need to do to get through this. And then doing for others. We have some wonderful volunteers back there in Julian's house, a voluntary organization here to support the bereaved people in our community. And I've been privileged to walk alongside some of them there who are now volunteers. So when the parents have done their grief work, they may turn around then and give to others, support others. You can even do that while you're doing your grief work, because I'll tell you, there's no bond beyond the loss of a child when you meet another parent. But don't forget your grief work. Any questions about this? Meaning making? Yes?
I don't know if it's related to what you're doing, but
Sure.
one of the things in the counseling and everything that I experienced with my wife, not one person has ever talked about broken heart syndrome.
Oh,
And that is real, but people don't want to accept it. But it is. I've seen it with my wife, and she's still a congestive heart failure because of it. And I just wish somebody would bring a little more emphasis on that, so that obviously that's delaying your grieving process.
it complicates it, yeah. It definitely does. So obviously I'm not a doctor, so I don't get into that, but I touched on it when I talked about how it affects us physically, right? The stress. And this gentleman was talking about broken heart syndrome, that there is a lot of research out there on that. You just think about stress in general, right? That could lead to physical problems. And while it may not be broken heart, it could lead to something else as well. So that's why it's so important to make sure to get physically assessed right away, as well as to do your grief work as well. Now, while there might be some underlying physical issues that the medical professionals have to deal with, you then also have to do your grief work. It's not unusual, very similar to what you just mentioned, that I'll get clients referred to me from ER or from their doctor. But the clients that get referred to me from ER, they go there thinking they're having a heart attack. But it's really an anxiety attack, a panic attack. And if they're fortunate enough to have a professional that asks just one more question, and that is, are you experiencing any stressors? And of course, if that person shares, yes, so-and-so died, that person, the medical professional, will usually say, go and talk to somebody. Because physically you're okay, but it's manifesting physically, with physical signs. So we know stress affects our bodies outside of a death experience, outside of a grief experience. But that's an excellent point, and it speaks to making sure physically we're well. At least to start off with. Yeah. Thank you. So what is a new normal look like? Again, down the road for those of you who are new to this process. At some point, you have to come to terms on a very heart and soul level that you are the parent of a deceased child. But you're still a parent. And this requires some negotiation, right? Whether consciously or subconsciously, with how are you going to continue parenting if you've got other children? While you have to manage your grief, if you have surviving children, they still need you in some form depending on their age. So how are you going to continue being there for them without it being all about your deceased child? Again, it's about balancing, paying attention to your grief, but also living. And if you have living children, how do I continue parenting them? Obviously, in the case of an only child who's died, that's completely different. It's been described as being part of a club no one wants to belong to. If you have a difficult time getting to any one of these parts that I just talked about, if you're experiencing some of these things, please seek professional assistance. Anything where your grief feelings are becoming more intense with time, you're withdrawing from people, you find you're becoming more angry and bitter, you have thoughts of harming yourself or anyone else, there's feelings of apathy or hopelessness, and it's persistent. Okay, it has to be persistent. Those feelings are normal, but if you're still going on and doing your living, okay, taking one step forward and feeling your grief and taking the next step forward, we're not talking about that, but we're talking about persistent, frequent, and it becoming more intense as time goes on. It's okay to feel bitterness, but if you don't express it, you don't release it, it stays in you. And it grows. And you become angry. So if you find yourself experiencing any of these, please do yourself and your loved ones a favor and seek some help. Following my 15-year-old son's death, my plans for parenthood sat like scenery on an empty stage. I needed to come up with a new life for myself. So then the question becomes, how do I remain connected to my child while I go on with living? Do not fall into the trap of thinking that the only way to remain connected to your beloved child is through pain. It's not. It's not through pain. It's actually learning to live a healthy life, a good life. That's the best way you can remain connected to them, to honor them. And we do this by what we call continuing bonds. At one point in time, it was felt that in order to move on with life, we had to withdraw all our attention and energy from the deceased and redirect it. And research has shown that that's not the case. That we can have a connection with our loved ones, where it's not right here, and it's not physical, but it's part of our lives. This is my continuing bond with Hannah, this work I do. So I don't need to talk about her every day, but I know I do it in honor of her. Surviving the death of a child takes a dedication to life. And I know you might not feel like you're living a life right now, But if you get up every morning and you take a breath and you put one foot in front of the other, you're living the life you're supposed to live right now as you process this overwhelming event. This is not your forever. It doesn't have to be your forever. So a dad says, what I did to keep breathing is different from what someone else will choose to do. I think that is the key word, choose. We can either choose to follow our child into the grave or learn to live without them. Live or die. Cancer stole their young lives. Will it steal yours too? Here are some suggestions from the parents that I've had the privilege of working with. What did the child bring to your life, to the dance of your life? How did they contribute? You may have brought them into the world, but they made your world a better place. Who was this person? Trust yourself, okay? The neighbor doesn't know you better than you, okay? You know yourself. Trust your gut. Be brave enough to say, no, thank you. I appreciate your assistance, but I'm good. Okay? Trust your inner resources. You are a good parent, so trust you can get through this. Again, you can't do this alone. Plan for life triggers, but also remember grief can be very sneaky. You go to the grocery store and you see his cereal or that jar of peanut butter that she loved. And you may leave the cart and run out. So grief is trying to get your attention when those things happen. You will eventually be able to go back to the grocery store and be able to withstand those unplanned triggers. Deep breathing in order to get through those unbearable moments of grief. You know the motto, one day at a time? Sometimes it's one moment at a time. Can I withstand this pain just for now? You feel it, you release it, you take a deep breath, you put your grief down, you get on with living for that moment, the next moment. Here are some other things you can do in honor of your child. Eventually, I'd like you to give yourself permission to live fully. Many times, parents, bereaved spouses that I've helped support, I've asked them to come speak at my presentations, and they've done that. They do that to honor their loved ones, to tell their story, to help somebody else. Make sure you set the intention. Make the decision to create a space for hope, for possibility, for peace, for relief, for gratitude, and yes, even a bit of joy. I'm more likely to listen to Tom than to somebody who hasn't gone through what he's gone through. He's walked through the fire 3 times over. He does have a surviving child. He's got podcasts and he's got videos, so if you want to look him up. So, just before we end, these are my 3 wishes for all of you here tonight. Ask those questions why, and I hope that you come up with an answer that you can live with. Find ways to be connected with your child in order to honor him or her. And I hope you find the courage and strength and serenity as you live on. And I'll end with this. Often the test of courage is not to die, but to live. I wish you well on your journey. And I hope that you find your way to creating a beautiful legacy for your children. Thank you for coming out tonight. I appreciate it. Any questions? Thank you. Any questions, comments? Yes, sir.
What's involved in your watching you from home, like on a video? Like, is it the live streaming, or how does that work?
Yeah, actually it's live streamed right now, but it is in the Families First YouTube channel.
You'll be able to find it on our website. If you go to Grieving Hearts on our website, you'll find a link to view past and this live stream. But you can also, just by going onto YouTube and Googling Families First Grieving Hearts.
Grieving Hearts.
You'll be able to find it on our YouTube page as well.
Okay. It's a great resource, right? And we do have these presentations monthly from September until June of every year. They differ, the topics differ. So tonight was very specific to death of a child. Next month it's spousal loss. Then there's also general topics like self-care, moving on, what does it mean, closure. So certainly keep your eye open if any of those presentations spark any interest, and just register on the Families First website. Okay, hope that helps. Yes?
What was the name of the book that you read from?
It is Permission to Mourn, A New Way to Do Grief.
Thank you.
Okay? Tom Zuba, S-U-B-A. Thank you so much. Have a safe drive back home or wherever you're going.